In this lesson, we'll be moving on to the Wireframe ribbon tab, and we will be also looking at some of our picking and snap tools, which are also known as our input options. But before we start on that, I'd like to quickly show you how we can clean our files or clear our session. Okay, so from time to time, our database may get corrupt. This is the nature of software, particularly if we are beginners and maybe doing some unusual operations. So we may see some funny behavior in our software. Maybe our tool components are coming in wrong, or our view is not quite right. So it could be any number of things, but essentially we may see our software not behaving correctly. So if this does occur, there are a couple of approaches we can take to correct this. So first of all, if we're in a file, let me open up a file quickly. So here we are in our file root object. Here are our parts. If I turn my preview on to graphic, we have our different parts that we brought in to our assembly. Double click to enter the assembly. Okay, so use this icon to exit out into the root environment again. So if we are experiencing some funny behavior, our first step would be to come into the root environment here, our root object, left click on this icon here, fix objects, to open up the drop down box and navigate to clean file. So left click on this to clean the file. Okay, and we should see an output in the corner of how that has gone. Okay, so that's the first step, cleaning your file. The next step would be to come into our session management. Okay, so ZW3D operates with sessions. This allows us to revert back to earlier instances in our designing sessions, or open an automatically stored backup if we experience a crash, or we can even open up separate sessions to have separate instances of ZW. So we can get into our session management by coming into the file drop down menu. Okay, if we can't see this, open it up with the blue arrow, file, manage session. Okay, we have our session options here. We can do a backup or restore to backups, open new sessions. In this case, we want to clear the session. Okay, so we left click on this, yes. Okay, and this should clear our session. We can then reopen our file, and hopefully the funny behavior should no longer be persistent. If, however, this does not fix the issue, there's one other thing we can do, and that is we close out of our software entirely, exit, we navigate into a folder where we have access to an address bar, and in this address bar we type %app data, percentage, press enter, and this takes us into our roaming folder. Okay, now scroll down in this folder until you come across this folder here, ZW 2015. Okay, double click in this folder, and then at the very top you'll see a folder titled .session. This is our session folder. Okay, now we've cleared the session before and this should have deleted the contents, but to make sure we're going to right click on this folder, delete the folder. Okay, so we permanently delete that session folder. Okay, but it's fine doing this. This folder will rebuild itself every time we open ZW, so you needn't worry about deleting it. And then we can exit out of this folder and restart our Jewelry Cad Dreamlight. And this should fix any issues that you are having with the software. Okay, so let's get started with this lesson. We're going to create a new file. Let's create our usual generic blank template file. Let's give it a name. Okay, so like I said, this lesson we're going to be looking in our Wireframe tab. in the ribbon bar this Wireframe tab. Okay, now many of these commands in the Wireframe tab are a lot like our sketching commands that we covered in an earlier lesson. The only difference is we are performing these operations in a 3D environment, not in a 2D environment like we are in the sketching. So there will be some slight changes to accommodate for that. And there are additional tools here as well. So let's start from the left. Okay, our first command is the points command. Okay, I'm going to cover this once we have a few more entities in our environment. Okay, so next up we have our line commands. Okay, so this is like the sketching environment. We have 2-point lines, and we have the other similar options available. But in this case we are performing our operation in 3D space. So we can place our lines, our first and second points, anywhere in this 3D environment. Okay, middle click to bring up the last operation. But in our options panel, in this input manager, we have the option to align a plane. If we are aligning our line on a plane, we are effectively creating a line like we do in the sketching environment. We're constraining our line to a 2D planar face. Okay. So we've created a line constrained to the top datum, the XY plane. Okay, so let's have a look at these two options down here. If we choose to align to a plane, select the top plane again. The projector plane, okay, if we disable this and we pick a point in space that is not on our plane, we're then going to draw our line on the plane of the selected point that is parallel to our selected plane. Okay. So we're drawing a line on the plane parallel to the top plane, but from our first point. Okay, if we project to a plane, this is going to project our line onto our selected plane. Okay, if we again align a plane, if we check the points on a line plane prior to selecting our first and second points, we're going to be selecting points constrained to our plane that we selected. Okay, so we cannot pick points outside of that plane. Okay, they're always going to be on that plane. Okay, so we have other options available in our line command. These are the same as in the sketching environment. I'm not going to cover these because we have looked at them in a previous lesson, and I'd recommend playing around with them yourself. Okay, but they're pretty intuitive. Moving on, in the line drop-down menu, you also have access to a polyline. So this polyline is exactly the same as in the sketching environment, except we're performing our operations in the 3D environment. Okay, and we have the same options as in the 2-point line in the options panel. Okay, so bear in mind, in the 3D environment we do not have our quick draw tool. Okay, so moving on, we have our arcs. Again, these are the same as within the sketching environment, only we are performing our operations in a 3D environment. Okay, we have our same defining methods. The only differences being is that we can align our arcs to planes. Okay, we're going through these quickly because we've seen them all before. Moving on, we have a concentric arc command. Now, we didn't actually see this in the sketching environment. With this, we have to pick a previously created arc or circle. A circle is an arc. Then we can define a radius, and this is going to draw a concentric circle with regards to that picked arc. Next up we have our rectangle and polygon quick draw tools. Okay, we have our same options available, only in this case for our first 2-point option we have to specify a plane to place our rectangle on. Okay, same with this defining method, we have to specify a plane to put our rectangle on. The next method, the 3-point method, we do not need to define a plane. We pick 3 points in space and then a rectangle is drawn between them. Alternatively, we can set this to be a parallelogram instead of a rectangle. And you should play around with these yourself to get an understanding of how they really work. So we also have the polygon, same as within the sketching environment. Moving on, we have the circle. Covered it before. We have the same options, different defining methods. Then we have the ellipse. This is like the rectangle, our first 2 options, we have to define the plane for it to be placed on. Our third option, the 3-point option, we can pick 3 points anywhere in space and we'll have our ellipse drawn with regards to those points. Okay, so these commands, these drawing commands, are very much the same as within our sketching environment. Okay, let me quickly go over these point commands, which again are like within our sketching environment. The point, it allows us to place a point entity anywhere in space, place it on entities, or at any location. Here we can place our points on the curve, same way as if you remember in our sketching environment. Same options. Okay, in this case we have a project where we can project our points onto some geometry. Okay, so we're moving through these commands pretty quickly, but as and when we come to use them we'll get a better understanding of their functionality. So moving on, we have our 3-point curve. Now this is like in our sketching environment, but we're doing it in the 3D environment. Okay, and we have quite a lot of options available in our input manager, our options panel, and the 3-point curve is a pretty useful one that we will want to make use of. So what this is doing is we're picking points and a curve will be drawn between them. Okay, and we middle click to stop placing points. Then if we come back in, left click on any of our points, we can use our handle here to modify the tangencies, the tangency radius and the tangency magnitude. Okay, right click, reverse the direction, right click, we can set our tangency to that of a different curve. Okay, it's going to align the tangency to that picked curve. Okay, so we can pick any point and modify the tangencies in this way. Or we can do it within our options panel. Tangent direction. Left click in that field. You can pick a direction and it's going to align the tangency there. Okay, we'll be understanding this options panel, there's quite a lot to it, so when we start using it more, we'll be taking a closer look at it. The only other thing I would want to point out is our parameterization. Okay, we can change the degree of the curve. The degree number must be equal to or greater than our number of points. Okay, and finally, our create curve open. If we uncheck this, we're going to create a closed curve. It's going to automatically add a connecting curve from our first point to our last point. Okay, so like I said, there is a lot in here, and it takes some playing around to really get a grasp of how it operates. Okay, so we confirm the operation. Next up we have our control point curve. So this is similar again to our 3-point curve, just a different defining method. We get a nicer, smoother result with this defining method. Okay, confirm the operation. We have our point cloud curve. Okay, so with this we can draw a curve with previously placed points. So we pick a start point, and then we pick the points we want our curve to pass through. Okay, and it's going to draw a curve through those picked points from our start point. Okay, finally we have our 3-point conic curve. Again, exactly like in our sketching environment, only we have a few more fields to accommodate for our 3D environment. Okay, so next up we have a series of commands. Now these commands, very useful to us. These commands are all performed on existing entities. Okay, so before we begin using these, I'll just show you the blend command that we have encountered before in the sketching environment. The blend allows us to blend between two curves. Create a blending curve between them with tangencies at the endpoints. Okay, and this is a nice tool, and we do use this. Okay, so we can make modifications to our weight at each end of our continuity. We can change it to curvature, simply a connecting line where there'll be no tangencies. So now I'm going to window pick everything, and I'm going to delete it so I can bring in a few entities that I can use to show you these commands. Okay, so I could delete the history. But this time I'm going to window pick my entire contents with my all entity filter. Okay, and then I can erase. Now you'll see that my center datums are also selected, so when I erase, they are gone too. Okay, I do not want to erase these, so I can undo this operation. Okay, a hotkey for undo is Control Z. Okay, so if I window pick again, I can now do a Control unpick of my selection. So holding down the Control key, left clicking on any already picked entity will unpick it from the selection. So you see I'm left clicking on my datums whilst holding down the Control key. Okay. If I want to repick something I've unpicked, holding down the Control key, left click, and that's going to add it to the selection. Okay, now I can erase these entities and simply press delete. Okay, so I'm going to place a few objects that we can use to show our commands on. So let's place a quick block, bring it in here, place another one, let's increase the height, as a base. Confirm, let's finally bring in a cylinder. as a base. Okay, so we have some objects in here, some shapes. Now we'll navigate back into our Wireframe tab and we'll take a look at our first command in this list, the curve from edge. Now this does exactly what it says. It creates a curve from edges. So we're prompted to pick edges. Okay, you'll see them highlight, you see them added to the field. Left clicking on them to pick them, confirm the operation. You'll see a slightly thicker black line appear on them. Okay, and that has created a line, a curve on those edges. So if we change our entity filter into curve, you can see we have our curves here. And we do not have curves on the other edges, which is simply edges. Okay, we still have our original edges there. So I blank out this object. There you can see our curves. Next up, we have a project to face command. Okay, this is going to project curves onto faces. Okay, so we can pick curves. So let's set our entity filter onto curve. Pick these curves. Okay, we can project them onto faces. So it's going to project our curves onto this face. We can specify a direction. So long as this direction will place them on the face. A bidirectional projection will project in both directions relative to our direction. Okay, in this case we have nothing, no faces in this direction. We can keep our original curves, our projected curves. Now we can trim to face boundaries. Okay, so if a face is trimmed, we can opt to project only to the trimmed faces and not to the entire untrimmed boundary of the face. Okay, so we have our preview there. Let's confirm the operation. There we have our projected curves on this face, and we have not kept to our original curves because we did not opt to. Okay, we can also project edges. We can project edges onto faces. So we can project this edge onto this face, like so. Obviously we're going to be keeping our original edge, but we have a new curve projected onto this face. Okay, next up we have our inter-X curve. This is our intersection curve. Okay, so this is going to create a curve, or curves plural, at the intersection of two shapes. Okay, a shape can be a face. So let me show you. If I extrude this curve in a negative X direction, confirm. Okay, so we've created a face which can also be used as a shape. Do an inter-X curve, our first shape, our second shape. We can pick them anywhere around, and this is going to create curves at the intersections of our two shapes. Okay, so we see a curve here and a curve here. Okay, the neat thing about this is we can create nice intersection curves between shapes. Okay, so we have two blocks here. Use the intersection curve, pick a first shape, second shape, confirm. Let's erase our added block. Okay, so you see here we have our intersection curves. Okay, so moving on, blend on face. So this is like our blending command, except we're performing our blends on a face. Okay, and this can be useful where we need to make sure that our curves are lying flat on a face. For example, if you want to do an inlay and we need to blend between curves, when we do an inlay we need to have all of our curves coincident on a face. So blend on face will ensure that they remain coincident on a face. Okay, so let's draw two lines, for example, on this face. Middle click again, pick the plane as the face, planar face, confirm. Now let's try our blend on face command. Pick the face, pick a start point. Okay, we are then prompted to pick a second face. If we leave this blank, our blend will take place on the same face. We pick our second point, okay, and then we can add our tangencies. And we can change the weights of these. Okay, so this has created a blend that has stayed coincident on this face. Okay, another way we could have done this to ensure that our blend is coincident on the face, if we undo this, we could have performed a normal blend on these curves. Okay, but maybe this blend is not remaining coincident on the face. To ensure it is, we can project our blend onto our face. Okay, and this ensures that it is coincident on this face so that we may perform, for example, an inlay. Okay, next up we have our curve on face 3 points. This does exactly what it says. We pick a face, we pick points on the face, and it's going to draw a curve through the points. Okay, moving on. ISO curve on face. Now, all surfaces have a wireframe geometry associated with them. Okay, and this will become clear when we use our ISO curves. Okay, so we have several options available. I'm going to come to this third one, the multiple option, to show you exactly what our ISO curves are. If we pick a face, you can see some lines thrown in on our face. We have U isocurves and V isocurves. These are perpendicular to one another. Okay, so every face has this isocurve geometry associated with it, a wireframe mesh associated with it. And we can draw curves on this mesh using this tool. Okay, so if we take a look at our side face, you see how our isocurves run on this face. We have our U curves running straight up and down, and our V curves are those that are wrapping around it. Okay, so this is the wireframe mesh of this cylinder. These are all brought in as curves. Again, you'll see the usefulness of this tool and get an understanding for how the wireframe mesh of a face can affect our designing as we progress further on in this course. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this now. Okay, moving on, we have our wrap on face. Okay, this is similar, I guess, to a project face, but in this case we are wrapping our sketch to a face. Okay, we can wrap it in various different ways. I will not go into great detail on this one right now. Moving on, we have a face curve. Again, I don't want to go into great detail on this one, but in this case, for the reason being that we do not often use this command. But I'll show you quickly. Our face curve, it allows us to pick a face. Okay, and then we have curves drawn on this face. But these are not usual curves, these are parting lines. Okay, so this is a new entity, the parting line entity, which we will not really be using. It creates a curve that is linked or associated with a face. Moving on, we can project a silhouette to a plane. Okay, so this will project the silhouette of a shape onto a plane, like so. Again, I don't want to touch on this too much. Same with our combined projection. As in when we come to use this tool, we'll get an understanding for it. Moving on, we've covered our blend. We have our offset commands, these being the same or very similar to as in our sketching environment. We can offset curves in a direction a certain distance. Okay, we can also offset our curve on a face. Okay, so we could offset this curve on this face like so. Okay, next up we have the 3D medial curve. This allows us to create a bisecting curve between two curves. Okay, and the curves can be edges. It's a bisecting curve or a medial curve. Moving on, we can create a spiral curve by picking a start point, an axis. Let's pick the y-axis. Specify the number of turns, the offset, and this creates a nice spiral. Okay, next along we can create a spiral helix. So like the spiral, pick a start point, pick an axis. Okay, but this time our spiral is making a progression along that axis. Okay, we can also taper it. Okay, so these are two nice tools for drawing some pretty interesting curves. And then we could, for example, loft a sketch around these curves. Okay, moving on, we have our equation command. We will not be using our equations, we will not be creating curves using equations. Moving on, we have our planar section. Okay, we pick a plane, pick an offset, pick a shape to project our plane to, and we're just creating a curve from our plane. Moving on, we have our curve list. We know how this works. We create a curve list entity from a number of connecting curves. Okay, so these curves have to be connected in order to create a curve list from them. We can do a quick chain pick, holding down the shift key. Okay, so here we have our curve lists. Okay, then we have our fillets, fillet chains, chamfer, chamfer chain, same as in the sketching environment. We have our trim tools, one touch trim, this is the same. Trim to faces, this is a new tool. We can trim our curves to faces or datum planes. So let's say I go into a top view. I'm going to select all of these curves and I'm going to trim them to my front datum. You can then flip the side, you can pick which side I want to trim them to, confirm, and you'll see them all trimmed to that plane. Okay, we then have our trim extend. It's the same as in the 2D environment. We're trimming or extending curves. trim or split at point. Okay, we're trimming curves at points, or splitting them at those points. We can trim or split with curves. We've seen these. We can trim and extend to corner. We've seen this before. Okay, next up we have our modify command. Okay, this is the same as in the 2D environment. It allows us to modify a selected curve, like so. We can access this same tool by double clicking on a curve. Double left clicking to bring up the modify command. We can then modify the position of our points. Left clicking to activate, middle clicking, move our point. Okay, left click to pick, middle click to begin moving. Left click to place. We can window pick more than one point. Window pick, middle click, and then we're moving more than one point. Middle click again to bring back the modify options panel. Okay, so there is a lot to this one. Just like the 3-point curve, there is a lot to the options panel, where we can modify the position of one point or more than one point. We can add tangency constraints. We can add more control points, less control points. We can reduce control points. Okay, next along we have our concatenate tool. Okay, so we've seen concatenate before. Okay, and it's going to work in the same way in this 3D environment. For example, if we draw a few curves, middle clicking, middle click again, to select my first point, let's snap to the end point there. Okay, so say we want to concatenate these two curves to make them into one curve. Okay, we can try concatenate straight away, pick them both, then add a continuity method that will make them continue smoothly from one to the other. Okay, so this is going to throw off our curve quite a lot in order to make them one complete curve. Okay, so an alternative method, before we concatenate our curves, we can blend them. Okay, if we put a blend between our two curves, we can add a nice tangency curve between them, and we can modify this. Okay, we're going to let it trim. So there we have 3 curves. We can now concatenate all 3 curves with no continuity method, because they are already tangent and that should concatenate them nicely. Okay, so we'll be using this and understanding this more as we progress. Okay, we also have the ability to convert our more complicated curves, split them up into separate individual curves. Okay, then we have our basic editing commands. These are exactly the same as within the shape ribbon tab, also the freeform ribbon tab, which we'll be looking at later. So these work in the same way. Okay, moving on, we have our curve info commands. Okay, this provides us information about our curves, and we can access these commands from within the inquire ribbon tab. Okay, which we'll be looking at a later time. So I'm going to leave these commands until then, but play around with them yourself. For example, the length, we can inquire the length of curves. Finally, we have our datum commands. We know what this does. Okay, so we covered quite a lot there. I recommend coming in and playing around with these commands yourself.